This is the Mavic 3 Pro, and this is the new DJI Air 3S. Let's go test and compare, see which one of these might be the right drone for you. And just so we're clear, DJI hasn't sent me any of these drones. I bought and paid full price for both of them because I use the Mavic 3 Pro a ton in my work. And the Air 3 is a drone that I've taken with me a lot when I do backpacking, hiking, stuff like that. And so I wanted to see, and I bought the Air 3S to see if it can replace the Air 3 or if it's worth it for the upgrade, and compare and hopefully help you decide. Now, when it comes to image quality, it was actually a lot harder to compare these two drones than I thought it would be. Now, there's obviously, they both have a 24mm wide angle camera and a 70mm telephoto camera. The Mavic 3 has that additional 162, 3, 4, whatever it is, very long angle lens, which gives you some really creative shots. And it's, you know, the quality is decent. It's not great in low light, it's terrible in low light, but in broad daylight or good lighting, it's actually pretty cool. And if you're shooting in normal color profiles on both of these drones, like, you really won't see much of a difference. Even though the Mavic 3 can shoot 5.3K and the Air 3 can only shoot 4K, like, you just won't see a lot of difference. Now, both of these drones do film slow motion. The Air 3S has been upgraded from 100 frames or 200 frames, depending on your resolution, to 120 frames a second in 4K and 240 frames a second in HD, which I love because it just translates out better if you're, slowing it down in post. 100 and 200 is kind of a weird thing to try and slow down. So what's interesting is the Mavic 3 will do 4K 120, and it's a very high quality 4K 120 because it crops way in on the sensor. Here you can see the regular field of view, and then this is the 4K 120. So it's giving you a pixel-to-pixel reading of 4K 120, which is good because you get good quality, but it will only do HD up to 200 frames a second, and again, it crops in even farther. So it's a very, very tight crop, and the dynamic range on both of those drones on the 1080, 200, 240 is really not that great. I wouldn't recommend using it, but the 4K 120 is actually pretty decent on both. I do think the Mavic 3 wins out a little bit just on the pure quality. The other thing is that the Air 3 can do slow motion on all or both of its cameras, where the Mavic 3 can only do 4K 60 on the 70mm. And so, like I said, if you just shoot in normal mode, actually I think the Air 3 probably is a little nicer, a little better, it's a good image. But if you shoot in log and you want the most amount of flexibility in post, the Mavic 3's main camera is still just about impossible to beat unless you jump up to something like an Inspire 3, which is insane, because it has actual D-Log, not D-Log-M. D-Log-M is a nice little log profile, but it's not a really, really flat log profile, whereas D-Log out of the Mavic 3's main camera is unbelievably great to color grade. I use the Mavic 3 on a ton of commercial work for TV shows and many other big, large productions because it just has such a great image out of that main camera. As soon as you switch into any of the other cameras, they're basically the same. Again, I think I'd probably give the edge to the Air 3 on the 1-inch sensor and on the 70mm sensor, just because it's newer. They have a little better imaging processing pipeline, I think, and so you definitely get a little bit more. But if you're doing log profiles, the Mavic 3 on its main camera still cannot be beat for being able to color grade in post and have the massive dynamic range and flexibility in post. But then we need to talk about low light. Now here is where in some cases the Mavic 3 wins quite a bit, and in some cases the Air 3S wins a little bit. But I think overall, even in night mode on the main cameras, the Mavic 3 still wins for low light performance overall, just because it gives you a sharper, clearer image, and it just has a little bit less noise, and that's because it has that big 4/3 inch sensor. The Air 3S though definitely holds its own, but you also have a little less control over night mode because it's just kind of all built into one system now. That being said, here's an ISO test in D-Log up to the max of both of their D-Log ranges, and then in night mode up to the max of both of their night mode or normal, in the Air 3S's case, ranges. Now the one thing I noticed on the Air 3S that I'm not a fan of is all the night mode footage feels a little soft and a little smeary, which I think is partly due to lens design and partly due to the new sensor. I don't actually know, I'm just guessing. But I also noticed that the Air 3S definitely has more lens flares than the Mavic 3 does, and not necessarily in a good way. I have been a fan of the lens flares overall of the Mavic 3, not a fan of the lens flares in the Air 3S. The one thing I will say about the Air 3S footage that I am not really a fan of is it has somewhat of an HDR look, and I think that's where DJI is processing the image to get those, what they claim is 14 stops of dynamic range. If you shoot in log, the Mavic 3 is still by far the better drone. But if you just want to post stuff straight off the drone and you want to throw stuff straight on social media, the Air 3S has a fantastic image. If you turn the sharpening down to about -1 or -2 and the noise reduction down to -1 or -2, you get what I consider to be a little bit nicer image. Hey, if you're enjoying or getting value out of this video, then consider subscribing. I go out and test and review and compare equipment in the most real world conditions I can find here in Alaska where I live, and I give you tips and tutorials on how to use them. Subscribing is free, doesn't cost you anything, and you can always unsubscribe later. But then we need to talk about photos. And again, this is another area where the Mavic 3 wins, sort of, technically it does, because of that 20 megapixel main sensor. It's a true 20 megapixels, which gives you just beautiful images straight out of camera. Now the Air 3 in its photos does a fantastic job in its 12 or 50 megapixel stills if you're using the main camera, or the 12 or 48 megapixel stills. But again, I still see lots of little kind of aberrations and strange weirdnesses in those photos. I will say that the 50 megapixel photos out of the Air 3S are better than the 48 megapixels were out of the Air 3 or out of the 70 millimeter camera on either drone. They just are better, and they definitely have more detail. I did, just for the heck of it, compare it to my Inspire 3, which is a 44.5 megapixel full frame sensor. And it's like, obviously the Inspire 3 is gonna beat it hands down. I should hope so, being that it's like 10 or whatever, 20 times the price. But I was surprised to see how good the Air 3 images hold up in that 50 megapixel mode. But again, there are some issues there that it's still like the 12 megapixel images are just a little cleaner. But if you do want a lot of detailed imagery, then yes, the 50 megapixels out of the main camera are fine. You just have to work with them a little more and not zoom in super close. But they definitely do have a fair amount more detail than the original Air's 3, 48 megapixels, which I wasn't a very big fan of. And then we come to active track. Both of these drones will active track, but the Mavic 3 is a much older drone, and while they've added some cool features, the active tracking is not quite as good as the Air 3 is. But let's do a little active tracking and keep running up the hillside here. So as you can see here, the active track works. Like, it's not terrible, but it's not great either. It lacks some of those features that the Air 3S has, or the Air 3 or even the Mini 4 Pro does, where you can have it do moves around you. But the biggest problem with the active track on the Mavic 3 is that it kind of tends to do this push in, pull out thing as it's following a subject. It's not super stable. But when it comes to the Air 3S, well, that's a little bit different story. So while they both do offer active track, the Air 3 just offers a much more refined and definitely much more advanced active track system, which isn't surprising. This is 3 years newer than the Mavic 3 Pro. So yeah, it should be quite a bit more advanced, and it definitely is. The other place that the Air 3 definitely wins over the Mavic when you're doing any sort of active tracking is the fact that the Mavic is limited to about 25 miles an hour for active track, where the Air 3 can active track all the way up to 32, 33 miles an hour. So if you do things like active track boats or cars, stuff like that, it's definitely going to help you get a lot more flexible tracking shots. But beyond active track, we also need to talk about their top speeds. Now, both of these drones offer very similar top speeds, but there is a couple of places where the Air 3 beats the Mavic 3 Pro, and that's in its top speed, which you can get up to 60 miles an hour, which is absolutely insane. But DJI says you do need a little bit of a tailwind, which I've got a tiny bit of a tailwind right now. I'm not quite hitting 60, but I have hit it other times. But the other place that makes a big difference is in the climb speeds. The Air 3 will now climb up to 22 miles an hour. If you're just doing a straight climb, and it will also dive at 22 miles an hour, which is terrifyingly fast. But there is a caveat to that, and that's it won't descend that fast if you are below your takeoff height. I discovered this when I was filming some downhill skiers this last year, heli-skiing, and I had to start at the bottom, otherwise I couldn't chase them downhill fast enough because it would limit the descent speed. Now the Mavic 3 has a top speed of 47-ish miles an hour, which I should have no problem hitting today because it's, you know, fairly smooth day, and 46 and a half, so ish, pretty close. But it will only ascend at almost 18 miles an hour, and it will only descend at 13 miles an hour. So a full like 10 miles an hour slower than the Air 3S. So if you want to get places fast, the Air 3S definitely does a better job. And when it comes to battery life and flight time and flight characteristics, battery life, they're actually quite similar. The Air 3 edges out the Mavic 3 Pro, but it'll match up pretty much exactly with the Mavic Classic. And that being said, the Air 3 definitely has a more refined flight feel as far as how it responds to the controls. You can tell that they've just continued to refine how the drone responds and how it interacts with your control inputs. So it just has a little bit better of a flight experience and feel. And when it comes to obstacle avoidance, like the Mavic 3 is good, the Air 3 is way better, especially in lower light situations, not just because of the new LiDAR sensor, but also because of the new cameras that they put on there, which now see into much lower light than the Mavic 3 system does. So this is a sound test of the Air 3S. It's about a little over an arm's length away, so maybe a meter and a half, 3.5 feet, or 4.5 feet from the camera right now. And then this is the Mavic 3. Definitely a little louder than the Air 3S was. Same distance away, 4.5 feet, about a meter and a half or so. And it's, yeah. And then we come to price, which is a huge determining factor for a lot of people. The Mavic 3 Classic starts at about $1,200, if I remember correctly, or $1,300, somewhere right in there. Probably find it on sale every once in a while. And the Air 3 starts at a little over $1,000. But if you want to get the fly mode combo, obviously that can go all the way up to about $1,500. But if you get the Mavic 3 Pro, then you're going to start at about $2,200 US, which is a lot. If you fly the Mavic 3 Cine like I do, then you're talking like $4,700, $4,800, which if you're making money with your drone, that's totally worth it. But then also if you get the fly mode combo for the Mavic 3 Pro or Classic, then you're going to be up at like $1,700 to $2,000 something dollars, or $3,800 you get the Mavic 3 Pro fly mode combo. So there's quite a bit of price difference. Like if you're not wanting to spend more than $2,000, obviously the Air 3S is going to be a fantastic drone for you. It's super solid. The flight characteristics are amazing. And the Mavic 3 Pro, while it's great and has fantastic image quality, the possibility that a Mavic 4 Pro something is around the corner, it might be worth waiting just a little longer. If you already have the Mavic 3 Pro, I don't see any reason to upgrade or cross-grade to the Air 3S. If you have the Air 3, yeah, there'll be a video about the Air 3 versus the Air 3S coming soon. Overall, if you just want to shoot good footage and take it straight off the drone and post it on social media, have some good pictures and stuff like that, the Air 3S is a solid drone, even if it does have a little bit of an HDR look. But if you want high quality footage that you can mix and match with other cameras, you can use on serious productions, the Mavic 3 is still the way to go. But next, you're going to want to watch this video right here where I compare some other drones. I'll see you over there. As always, if you have questions, ask me in the comments below or join my live stream, which happens most Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern. At least if I'm not out doing stuff like, well, actually sometimes, even if I am out doing stuff like this. I'll see you again soon in the next one. Cheers.